My name is Olivia, and this is the story of the day I realized I had never truly belonged in my own family, the Miller family. I came to my sister Chloe's wedding at the Grand Willow Creek Manor with a weary heart but a simple intention: to celebrate. Smile for a few requisite photos, and dutifully play the role of the kind, supportive older sister, just as I always had. It was the performance they expected, the one I'd perfected over 34 years. The manor was even more imposing than the pictures suggested, a sprawling historic estate nestled beside a tranquil lake. Known for its meticulously kept gardens and lavish ballrooms with impossibly high, ornate ceilings, it screamed old money and status, something my family, particularly Mom, desperately aspired to associate with. As soon as my modest sedan pulled up to the main entrance, a valet in a crisp black suit materialized to open the door. He offered a polite, impersonal smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I took a deep, fortifying breath. Smoothing the deep wine-colored dress I'd spent weeks searching for, the only one I owned that felt remotely appropriate for such an ostentatious event. Yet still felt hopelessly inadequate. I forced a smile onto my own lips as I stepped out and walked towards the heavy oak doors, the weight of unspoken family history pressing down on me. I reminded myself, yet again, that I wasn't trying to draw attention or make this day about me. This was supposed to be Chloe's day, her fairy tale moment, bankrolled significantly by our parents and, I suspected, our future brother-in-law's family. I had long ago accepted the painful truth that I wasn't the favored child, the one Mom doted on and Dad quietly enabled. But even with that acceptance, what I didn't expect, what still managed to shock me, was the sheer, calculated coldness they could deploy, even here, today. As soon as I stepped into the cavernous main hall, with its polished marble floors and towering floral arrangements, a young woman at the reception desk greeted me with a practiced, dazzling smile. She looked barely out of college, her uniform immaculate. "Your name, please." Her voice was bright, professional. "Olivia Miller," I said softly, my voice barely echoing in the large space. Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. I saw the flicker of confusion, the subtle hesitation behind her perfectly made-up eyes. Her hand, adorned with a simple silver ring, flipped through the laminated guest list a little faster than seemed necessary. Her painted fingernail tracing the names. It stopped abruptly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the entry, before she looked back up at me, her professional mask firmly back in place, though slightly strained. "Ah, yes, Miss Miller. Here it is." She paused, clearing her throat delicately. "You're placed in the service hallway area." I blinked, processing the words. They sounded absurd, unreal. "I'm sorry, where?" I asked, needing to hear it again, hoping I'd misheard. "Just outside the main ballroom, near the passage to the kitchens," she elaborated, attempting a casual tone that didn't quite land. "It's a bit busy back there, but there's a small table set up." My gaze instinctively shot to the ornate seating chart displayed on a nearby easel. I scanned the elegantly printed names under the heading Main Ballroom. There they were, Mr. Arthur Miller and Mrs. Eleanor Miller, seated prominently at the head table, naturally. Chloe's sorority sisters, her noisy friends from Ashton University. Noah's colleagues from his IT firm, all listed with table numbers nestled comfortably inside the grand hall. Beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers I could glimpse through the open double doors. "And me?" I asked, trying desperately to keep the tremor out of my voice, the rising tide of humiliation contained. "I didn't see my name listed anywhere inside." "Are you quite sure?" "Perhaps there's been a mistake." The receptionist offered another smile, this one decidedly more awkward, bordering on pitying. "I'm afraid not, Miss Miller." I double-checked. "This is the assigned spot according to the final plan we received." She gestured vaguely towards the service corridor, avoiding my eyes now. A familiar burning sensation started low in my chest, spreading upwards. Humiliation, sharp and cold. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the main hall really had run out of space, though it looked enormous. Maybe it was a genuine, last-minute administrative error by the venue staff. Maybe. But then, through the ballroom doors, I saw Mom Eleanor, fussing over Chloe, adjusting the ridiculously long veil cascading from her elaborate updo. They were huddled together, laughing intimately, sharing a private joke. Clinging to each other as if cocooned in their own perfect world where nothing, and no one, else mattered. As if seating her older daughter next to the clattering kitchen wasn't even a footnote. Steeling myself, I walked over, my sensible heels clicking too loudly on the marble. I kept my voice steady, level. "Mom, can I talk to you for just a second?" Mom, Eleanor, didn't even turn her head fully towards me. Her attention remained fixed on smoothing an invisible crease in Chloe's satin gown. "Not now, Olivia. Honestly. Can't you see we're in the middle of something important?" Her tone was dismissive, impatient. I bit the inside of my lip, tasting metal. "It will only take a minute, Mom." She let out an audible groan, a sigh laden with annoyance, but finally stepped a few inches aside, turning partially. Chloe remained perfectly still, observing me, her eyes, expertly lined, locked on mine with a saccharine smile that could hardly be called warm. It held a glint of satisfaction. "I've been seated out in the service hallway," I stated plainly, keeping my voice low but firm. Mom shrugged, a tiny, dismissive gesture, as if I'd complained about the temperature. "Well, yes. We had to prioritize the most important guests, Olivia." "Chloe's guests. You understand seating charts are complicated." My hands clenched into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms. "I am family, Mom. Your daughter. Chloe's sister." The words felt thick, almost choking me. She let out a soft, chilling laugh, devoid of any humor. "Oh, Olivia, don't make such a fuss about everything. It's just a seat." Chloe chimed in then, her voice like spun sugar laced with arsenic. "Honestly, Olivia, I'm sure it was just some mix-up with the venue. Nobody meant anything by it. Weddings are totally hectic, you know." Her gaze, however, was anything but innocent. It was sharp, knowing. I turned back to Mom, searching her face, hoping for even a flicker of remorse, of understanding, of maternal concern. But there was nothing. Just a carefully constructed mask of polite impatience and a weary sigh. "Don't you dare ruin your sister's big day with your negativity, Olivia," Mom warned, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "Frankly, you should just be grateful you were invited at all, considering." "Considering what?" My quiet disapproval? My refusal to fawn over Chloe? My very existence? The word grateful lodged itself in my throat like a jagged stone. Grateful? Grateful to be treated like an inconvenient afterthought, a second-class citizen in my own family? Grateful to be relegated to a noisy corridor next to the clanging pots and pans of the kitchen? Before I could formulate a response, before the tightly controlled dam inside me broke, Dad, Arthur, materialized beside us. He held a half-empty glass of amber liquid, his gaze studiously avoiding mine, fixed somewhere on the carpet pattern. His voice was low, placating, the familiar tone he used whenever he wanted conflict to simply evaporate. "It's just a seat, sweetheart," he murmured, addressing the floor more than me. "Let's not make it a thing. It's Chloe's wedding." I stood utterly still, frozen in the crossfire of their casual cruelty. The anger was there, simmering beneath the surface, not a hot, explosive rage, but something deeper, colder. A slow-burning ember of years of accumulated hurt and invisibility. I managed a smile, tight and empty, a pale imitation of politeness. I turned away without another word, the silence stretching between us. They thought I'd just take it, absorb the slight, and retreat quietly into the shadows where they preferred me. Like always. But this time felt different. Something inside me, brittle from years of bending, had finally snapped. This time, I wouldn't just disappear. I walked slowly out of the grand main hall, away from the sparkling lights and the forced laughter. My heels clicked lightly against the cold marble floor, the sound echoing slightly in the sudden quiet of the corridor outside. The air here smelled different, less of expensive perfume and wedding flowers, more of polish and faintly, disinfectant, mixed with the distant, greasy aroma of food preparation. And something else, the unmistakable scent of being utterly out of place. Like me. In my hand, I clutched the offending place card. My name, Olivia Miller. Table H, service hallway area. The elegant, looping gold cursive felt like a deliberate, mocking slap in the face. I turned the small, stiff card over and over in my fingers, my palm growing damp despite the cool air. I had hoped, foolishly, naively, just this once, for this one day, that my family might see me, acknowledge me, treat me as one of them. An equal. A daughter. A sister. But clearly, that was a fantasy I needed to finally relinquish. They never had. They never would. A soft click echoed from behind me. The heavy door to the main hall eased open just a crack. Olivia. Chloe's voice called out, deceptively light, almost like a casual greeting, but sharp enough, pointed enough, to make me stop in my tracks. I turned slowly, deliberately. She stood there in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright lights of the ballroom, arms crossed defensively over her designer gown. Her veil fluttered slightly in the draft, her makeup remained flawless, but the smile plastered on her face was anything but kind. It was edged with smug triumph. "Are you upset?" she asked, tilting her head, feigning innocence with absolutely no real concern in her eyes. "Because of the seating arrangement?" A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Upset? No, Chloe. I'm not upset." My voice was low, dangerously calm. "I'm disappointed. Profoundly disappointed." Chloe tilted her head further, her eyes lighting up with a spark of amusement, as if I just told a particularly funny joke she was privy to. "Oh, Olivia. You're always so sensitive, taking everything so personally. It's just a seat, for heaven's sake. Who even cares where people sit?" I bit the inside of my cheek hard, tasting blood again, anchoring myself against the surge of raw emotion. I kept my voice steady, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "You know perfectly well it's not about the seat itself, Chloe. It hasn't ever been just about the seat, or the room, or the gift. It's about how this family, our family, consistently treats me. It's always been this way, a pattern you're more than happy to perpetuate." She shrugged, a dismissive flick of her shoulders, draped in expensive lace. "So what if it is? You still showed up, didn't you? Still wore the pretty dress, hoping someone might notice you. Still hoping for a crumb of attention." She stepped closer then, gliding silently across the marble, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, meant only for me, sharp and venomous. "You're desperate for their approval, Olivia. Mom's, Dad's, anyone's. It's actually kind of sad to watch." I met her gaze directly, holding it, refusing to flinch. "No, Chloe," I replied, my voice quiet but unwavering. "What's truly sad is that you seem to need to tear someone else down just to feel remotely secure or loved yourself." That landed. I saw a flicker of something, surprise? Anger? Cross her face, making her pause for a brief second. But then, as if shaking off an annoying fly, as if my words meant absolutely nothing, Chloe laughed, a brittle, forced sound. "Wow. You really know how to kill the mood, Olivia. You always did." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed behind her. It was Mom, Eleanor, her expression tight, pinched, like she'd been forcibly dragged away from mingling with important guests to handle some trivial, unpleasant family matter. "Me? I heard there was some sort of drama out here," Mom asked, her eyes flicking immediately to Chloe, assessing her favored daughter first. Barely glancing in my direction. "Is everything all right, sweetie?" I took a slow, deliberate breath, reminding myself I deserved a proper explanation, not dismissive platitudes. "Mom," I began again, my voice surprisingly firm. I was seated in the service hallway, next to the kitchen entrance. "I'm not some distant acquaintance you barely know, or a plus one of a coworker. I am your daughter." Mom's brow furrowed for a moment, a calculated display of mild confusion, before smoothing into a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Olivia, darling, it's not that I don't value you, of course I do. It's just, well, there were limited prime seats inside the ballroom, you see." Her gaze shifted slightly, avoiding mine. "I simply had to prioritize people who are closer." I stood utterly still, the word hanging in the air between us, heavy and toxic. "Closer," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "What did you just say?" Closer to Chloe, naturally, Mom amended quickly, a faint flush rising on her neck. You know, Aunt Patty, her best friend Maya from Ashton, the Sinclair family friends. People who were really there for her when she was sick last year. Well, Olivia, you've always been so remarkably independent. Strong. I never really had to worry about you, did I? The justification hung in the air, flimsy and insulting. A laugh escaped me then, so soft and bitter it surprised even myself. You never had to worry about me? I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. And you honestly think that justifies treating me like I don't exist? Like my presence here is an inconvenience. Chloe immediately jumped in, her voice cloyingly syrupy, playing the role of the aggrieved victim. Olivia, stop it. You're twisting Mom's words. Mom didn't mean it like that at all. You're completely overreacting and making a scene. Honestly. You should just be grateful you were even invited. That line, that specific word grateful, wielded like a weapon again, cut deeper than she could possibly know. I turned my full attention to Mom, truly looking at her, perhaps for the first time, seeing past the maternal facade to the cool calculation beneath. Do you have any idea, I asked slowly, deliberately, how utterly hollow and cruel the word grateful sounds when you've spent my entire life making me feel like a stranger in my own family? She said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line. There was no softening in her eyes, no reach of a hand, no murmured apology, no acknowledgement whatsoever of the hurt she had inflicted. Not just today, but over decades. Just silence. A deep, familiar male voice came from my left, low and weary. It's just a seat, Olivia. It was Dad, Arthur. He stood there, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes still stubbornly fixed on the floor, a master of avoidance. Still the same passive stance, the same refusal to intervene, to acknowledge the blatant unfairness. Like always. I turned to face him directly, speaking slowly, clearly, forcing him to engage. I don't need you to defend me, Dad. I stopped expecting that years ago. But the least you could do is look me in the eye when you dismiss my feelings. He looked up then, startled. Confusion flickered briefly in his eyes before it was replaced by his usual guarded weariness. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, offering no defense, no explanation. Chloe shrugged dramatically, tossing her head back as if dealing with a stubborn, unreasonable child who was ruining the adult's sophisticated party. Well, if you're going to be that unhappy about it, Olivia, she said with a final, cutting remark, maybe you should just leave. I looked at the three of them then, Mom, Dad, Chloe, these people bound to me by blood, the people I once desperately called my family. And suddenly, with a chilling clarity, I realized maybe Chloe, for once, was absolutely right. Maybe leaving was the only sane option left. My hand tightened its grip on my small clutch purse, the leather cool against my skin. I took another deep, shuddering breath. Something inside me, stretched taut for years, finally cracked, not from weakness, but from a sudden, blinding clarity. A point of no return had been reached. If they had collectively, deliberately decided that I didn't belong here, that my presence was conditional and inconvenient, then I wouldn't keep trying to force my way into a space I was never truly welcome. The endless performance was over. And what was about to unfold later this evening, the truths that were simmering just below the surface, would ensure they never, ever forgot this night, or the daughter they had pushed away one too many times. I turned and walked quickly, decisively, down the thick, plushly carpeted service hall, my sensible heels sinking slightly into the pile. Swallowed by the muffling silence. Behind me, the cheerful music from the grand ballroom played on, the lively chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses. The bursts of laughter, but it all sounded distant now, tinny, like it emanated from another world entirely. A world I was never really invited into, merely permitted to observe from the fringes. I stopped at a quiet, dimly lit corner alcove, away from the main traffic flow, clutching my purse strap as if it were a lifeline. The only solid thing keeping me grounded in this surreal, painful moment. Chloe's mocking smirk, Mom's dismissive wave of the hand, Dad's determinately averted gaze. The images swirled relentlessly in my mind, a discordant, broken melody of rejection. And then a memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp and painfully clear, as if it had happened only yesterday. Not several years ago during a strained family reunion dinner. It was one of those rare occasions when Chloe wasn't the center of attention. Having dramatically flounced off to Italy with her latest wealthy boyfriend after a minor argument with mom about wedding guest lists even then, the house in Maplewood felt unnervingly calm without her constant drama. The air free from the cloying scent of her expensive perfume that usually permeated every room. Mom had asked me, quite casually, to go up to my old childhood bedroom to find some specific family photos she wanted to scan for some digital album project she was working on. I'd nodded, feeling a small, pathetic flicker of hope at being included, at being given a task that felt vaguely meaningful. Or at least acknowledged my existence within the family narrative. My old room was a time capsule, largely untouched since I'd left for college at the State University of Bridgeport, escaping to my own life. My own studies, my own hard-won independence financed by scholarships and endless part-time jobs. The narrow twin bed by the window, the dusty bookshelf filled with novels that had been my true companions. The faded high school photos tacked to the corkboard, mostly of me alone, or with friends, rarely with family. I rummaged through the designated drawer in the old dresser and found the shoebox overflowing with snapshots, mission accomplished. But then my eyes landed on the bottom drawer of Mom's antique vanity table in the hallway landing, usually kept locked. That day, it was slightly ajar. I didn't know why, a morbid curiosity, a subconscious need for answers I couldn't articulate, but I pulled it open. Inside, nestled amongst sachets of lavender and old jewelry boxes, lay a striking crimson leather journal, its cover smooth and expensive-looking. Intrigued, I lifted it out. It felt heavy, important. Every single page was filled with Mom's distinctive, meticulously neat handwriting, careful, slanted letters documenting plans, aspirations, budgets. I flipped it open randomly, not expecting anything personal, perhaps lists or notes. But then I read the first lines on the page I'd opened to: Chloe, Ashton University Tuition Fund, Final Payment Schedule. EST. Total, $250,000 parental contribution, 100%. Below it, meticulous notes about potential study abroad programs in France, summer internships sourced through Dad's contacts. Even ideas for graduation gifts. My breath caught. I turned the page. Chloe, potential wedding savings goal, car down payment luxury SUV preferred, designer gown budget. Contribution towards Willow Creek Manor booking. Page after meticulous page detailed financial planning, life milestones, strategies for social advancement. Networking opportunities, all revolving exclusively around Chloe. It was a roadmap for her success, her happiness, carefully curated and funded by our parents. My hand started to shake. I began searching frantically, desperately, flipping through the journal, scanning every line, needing to find some evidence, any evidence, that I, too, had figured into their plans, their concerns, their aspirations for their children. That my hard work, my scholarships, my master's degree earned while working 2 jobs, meant something to them. There was nothing. Not a single sentence about my education, beyond a brief, dismissive note about Olivia, State University scholarship cover. Not a word about my career as a librarian, my quiet achievements. Not even my name, Olivia, appeared anywhere else in this detailed chronicle of future family investment. It was as if my life, my struggles, my successes, were entirely irrelevant to the grand, Miller family plan. I clutched the crimson leather journal so tightly my knuckles turned white, the expensive leather biting into my skin. Just then, Mom walked up the stairs, humming softly, stopping short when she saw me sitting motionless on the landing carpet. The journal lying open in my lap, my face pale. This is all for Chloe?" I asked, my voice small, thin, cracking with a pain I couldn't conceal. The tuition, the car, the wedding fund. Mom glanced down at the open journal, then back at me, and she actually smiled, a bright, almost proud smile. Completely oblivious to the devastation she had wrought. "Oh, that." "Yes, well, Chloe," she said lightly, as if discussing the weather. "She needs a bit more support. Guidance. We have to make sure she has every advantage, finds the right path, meets the right people. She's sensitive. You know, not as naturally driven as you. I bit my lip until I tasted the metallic tang of blood again. And what about me, Mom? I whispered, the question hanging heavy in the suddenly silent hallway. What about my path? My support. Mom looked at me then, her expression shifting slightly, a flicker of impatience crossing her features. Her eyes were unwavering, almost pitying. Olivia, darling, you've always been so independent, so capable. You figured everything out yourself, scholarships, loans, your little library job. You didn't need me to plan things out for you or worry about your finances. You have your own way. She reached out and patted my shoulder dismissively. You have your books and your quiet life. That's wonderful for you. I nodded slowly, saying nothing more, unable to speak past the lump forming in my throat. But something inside me, something vital, shattered irrevocably in that moment, the last vestiges of my childhood innocence, the lingering, foolish hope for equal regard, and the desperate, aching part of me that still, after all these years, longed for my mother's genuine recognition and pride. That memory, that specific, searing moment of dismissal, came flooding back with startling vividness there in the hushed, impersonal corridor of Willow Creek Manor, outside Chloe's extravagant wedding reception. Nothing had changed. Not really. I was still Olivia, the self-sufficient daughter Mom never felt the need to invest in, emotionally or financially. The daughter who apparently didn't merit a decent seat at her own sister's wedding because she never had to be worried about. A profound chill ran down my spine, unrelated to the building's air conditioning. It was the chilling clarity of finally, truly understanding. With a sigh that felt like it released years of tension, I sank onto the hard, unwelcoming bench near the service entrance, right next to the coat check area, precisely where they had deemed I belonged. Out of sight, out of mind. I looked down at the elegant, mocking name card still clutched in my hand, the gold script shimmering under the dim lighting. Then I glanced up at my own faint, blurry reflection in the darkened window pane beside me. A pale, serious woman in a wine-colored dress stared back, looking profoundly weary and utterly alone. Inside the ballroom, the wedding celebration continued its oblivious course, the glittering lights, the pristine white flowers flown in from somewhere exotic, Chloe's dazzling, practiced smile captured by flashing cameras, her obscenely expensive designer dress whispering with every movement. But I sat here, literally and figuratively on the periphery, relegated to the borderlands of memory, space, and familial affection. If this uncomfortable bench in a noisy service corridor was where they genuinely believed I belonged, then perhaps they had never truly known me. Or seen me, at all. And for the first time, staring at that ghost in the glass, I didn't feel the familiar pang of sadness or longing about that realization. I just felt numb. And then, slowly, unexpectedly, a quiet, unfamiliar feeling began to replace the numbness. A feeling like I was finally stepping out of the long, suffocating shadows they had cast over me for so very many years. And strangely, unexpectedly, I felt ready to face all of it, whatever came next. I remained seated on that hard bench by the service corridor window, my heart a tangled knot of past hurts and present indignation. Everything that had just transpired, Chloe's condescending remarks laced with malice, Mom's casual dismissal of my feelings as if they were insignificant trifles, kept replaying in my head, an endless, painful loop with no off switch. Each remembered word, each dismissive gesture, fueled the cold, simmering anger that had been building within me for years. Olivia. A low male voice, hesitant but familiar, startled me from my brooding thoughts. I looked up, my guard instantly raised. Standing in front of me, looking uncomfortable and out of place in the service corridor, was Noah Sinclair, the groom of the day, Chloe's soon-to-be husband. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but his silk tie was slightly loosened, and his usually neat dark brown hair looked ruffled, as if he'd been anxiously running his hands through it. He held a champagne flute, but the golden liquid within remained untouched, forgotten. I pushed myself up from the bench, automatically smoothing my dress, offering a slight, guarded nod. Noah. My voice was cooler than I intended. He looked at me intently, his brow furrowed slightly, his gaze searching, as if he was trying to piece together a puzzle. Seeing you sitting out here, alone, it doesn't feel right, Olivia. He gestured vaguely towards the empty bench and the nearby kitchen doors. A short, humorless laugh escaped me. Really? You find it odd? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness entirely out of my tone. Because apparently, your bride and her family decided I'm not quite worthy of a seat in the main hall with the rest of the esteemed guests. He said nothing immediately, just shifted his weight, looking profoundly uncomfortable. A heavy, awkward silence descended between us, two people who barely knew each other beyond polite family introductions. Yet we're suddenly sharing this strangely intimate, uncomfortable moment, united by the chaos Chloe inevitably created. Olivia, Noah finally said, his voice lower now, more serious, glancing down the corridor as if ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. Can I ask you something? Off the record? I met his troubled gaze, intrigued despite myself. Go ahead, Noah. He hesitated, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly around the fragile stem of the champagne flute. Has she ever said anything about me, or my family, or finances, that seemed off to you? Strange. I tilted my head, considering his question carefully. This felt like more than just pre-wedding jitters. Are you asking if I've ever heard Chloe badmouth you or complain about your family? I probed gently. It's more than just that, he sighed, frustration etched on his face. He pulled his sleek smartphone from his inner jacket pocket, glanced down at the screen briefly, then shook his head as if dismissing a thought, and slid it back into his pocket. It's just, lately, especially these past few months, she's been different. More controlling. Really secretive, especially about money. Always checking my phone, questioning expenses. He paused, looking genuinely distressed. And she asks weird questions about mom, about Isabella, about Innovatech, things that don't feel right. There are things she clearly doesn't want me to know, arguments that appear out of nowhere. And I'm starting to realize something's fundamentally not right here. I paused, considering how much to reveal. Chloe's casual cruelty, her manipulative comments during past family gatherings. Her constant obsession with status and money, these still echoed sharply in my mind. I had never breathed a word of it to Noah, or anyone outside the immediate, toxic family circle. Partly because I instinctively avoided causing more drama, partly because my concerns had always been dismissed by mom and dad, and partly because, deep down, I was so used to being ignored that I assumed no one would believe me anyway. But seeing the genuine distress in Noah's eyes, the dawning realization that he might be making a terrible mistake, made it impossible for me to stay silent this time. He deserved to know. Noah, I began slowly, choosing my words with care. You might want to brace yourself for what I'm about to say. My voice was quiet but firm, because I honestly don't think you really know the woman you're about to marry. I don't think any of us truly do, except maybe mom. He opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to ask for clarification, but another voice cut through the tension, soft yet strangely powerful, carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. And if you're still harboring any doubts, Noah dear, the voice stated coolly, then perhaps your mother can help make things unequivocally clear. We both turned sharply. Isabella Sinclair, Noah's mother, stood at the end of the corridor, near the entrance to the main hall. She held a slim, expensive-looking tablet computer, her sharp, intelligent eyes locked intently on her son. Isabella was the kind of woman who commanded attention effortlessly the moment she entered a room, not through loudness or ostentation, but through an aura of quiet confidence, steely resolve, and palpable intelligence. As the founder and CEO of the successful tech firm Innovatech Solutions, she radiated competence and a no-nonsense attitude. Today, she wore an impeccably tailored navy silk gown that whispered elegance, her signature platinum hair swept up in a sleek, sophisticated bun. Her eyes, observant and assessing, seemed sharp enough to cut through any pretense, any lie. She walked towards us with measured steps, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, stopping directly in front of Noah. She held out the tablet. Look at this, Noah. Her voice was calm, controlled, but held an undercurrent of grim certainty. Noah took the tablet hesitantly, his finger hovering over the screen before swiping. His brow furrowed in confusion at first, then his eyes widened in stunned disbelief. I watched his hand begin to tremble slightly as he scrolled down, reading message after message. I couldn't see the screen clearly from my angle, but Noah's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to shocked anger, then to something deeper. More devastating, the look of profound, heart-wrenching betrayal. Noah's voice cracked, barely a whisper. She told her influencer friend on Glam Life that I was easy to handle and totally manageable? His voice rose slightly, incredulous. She said my mom, you, was the real prize, and that marrying me meant access to the Innovatech money tree? He looked up at Isabella, his face pale, stricken. She joked about aiming for a seat on the Innovatech board, once she had me wrapped around her little finger? Isabella nodded grimly, her expression a mixture of maternal pain and steely resolve. Yes. And worse. There are also direct messages where she discusses manipulating you, isolating you from friends, and consulting with someone about maximizing potential settlements, just in case things don't work out long term. Her voice remained steady, factual. It seems Chloe was planning her exit strategy before the wedding even began. I looked at Noah. His face had gone deathly pale, his broad shoulders tense, hunched, as if bracing against a physical blow. The champagne flute slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering silently on the plush carpet, the golden liquid spreading like a stain. He didn't even seem to notice. I can't believe this, he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief and hurt. Mom, where did you get these? Is this even real? Isabella glanced briefly at me, a flicker of shared understanding passing between us, before turning her full attention back to her devastated son. An old acquaintance of mine runs a data recovery service, she explained calmly, her businesslike tone taking over. Apparently, the backup servers for that Glam Life platform Chloe uses experienced a minor breach. My acquaintance came across these messages during the security audit. Knowing my connection and having heard rumors, he felt ethically obligated to forward the relevant data to me. She paused, letting the information sink in. I verified their authenticity, Noah. They are quite real. Noah sank heavily onto the bench beside me, the tablet still gripped tightly in his trembling hand, his knuckles white. The air around us felt heavy, frozen, charged with the catastrophic weight of exposed lies. I sat beside him again, simply offering a silent presence. There were no words adequate for this moment. Part of me ached for him, for the genuine pain etched onto his face. But another, colder part of me, the part forged in years of my own family's betrayals, recognized this inevitable implosion for what it was, the moment when carefully constructed facades finally crumbled, when buried ugly truths clawed their way into the harsh light of day. Isabella stood over us, silent for a few long seconds, her expression unreadable. Then, she looked directly at me, her sharp gaze softening almost imperceptibly. Olivia, she said quietly, her voice losing some of its businesslike edge. Thank you for your honesty. For not turning away or enabling this charade. I offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't need thanks. I just needed the truth, finally, not to remain buried under layers of pretense and forced smiles. And standing there, in that cold, sterile service corridor, with the groom shattered and the mother of the groom holding digital evidence of profound betrayal, I knew with absolute certainty that this wedding, this carefully orchestrated performance, would no longer proceed according to Chloe's script. Her reign of manipulation, fueled by entitlement and familial indulgence, was about to come to a very abrupt, very public end. The atmosphere inside the private study on the manor's second floor felt thick and suffocating. Heavy velvet curtains blocked the afternoon sun, casting the room in shadow, illuminated only by a single antique desk lamp. No one spoke as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, sealing us in. The only sounds were the low hum of the central air conditioning and the faint, incongruous sound of chirping birds drifting in through a slightly open window overlooking the manicured gardens. Noah sat rigidly at the head of the polished mahogany table, his eyes vacant, staring sightlessly at the wood grain. Isabella stood protectively behind him, her hand resting lightly but firmly on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. The only anchor in his crumbling world. I sat slightly to the right, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to maintain an outward composure. Even though my heart pounded against my ribs so loudly I was sure everyone in the tense, silent room could hear it. The door opened again, breaking the stillness. Chloe swept in, Mom, Eleanor, trailing anxiously behind her like a nervous lady in waiting. Mom looked bewildered, clearly summoned without explanation, but Chloe didn't look confused. She wore her usual mask of supreme confidence, though today it seemed brittle, stretched thin. I detected a flicker of wary caution in her eyes as she surveyed the grim tableau, Noah's stony face, Isabella's resolute stance, my quiet presence. What on earth is going on here? Chloe demanded, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual, an attempt to seize control of the narrative. To project normalcy onto a situation that was anything but. Why are you pulling people out of my wedding reception? Guests are starting to wonder. Noah stood up slowly, deliberately. The vacant look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the look of a man whose illusions had been irrevocably shattered. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and retrieved a crisp white envelope. He placed it firmly, decisively, on the gleaming surface of the table between them. Do you recognize this, Chloe? His voice was quiet, steady, devoid of inflection, which somehow made it more chilling. Chloe stared at the envelope, her forced smile faltering. She said nothing, but a flicker of panic crossed her eyes. It's a petition to annul our marriage, Noah stated flatly, his voice unwavering. Legally drafted this morning by my attorney. And just so we're clear, in case you care at all, I've already signed it. The room plunged into an even deeper silence, thick and absolute. Mom gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Chloe physically recoiled, stepping back as if struck, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. You are joking, right, Noah, she finally managed, attempting a shaky laugh that sounded utterly unconvincing. This is some kind of sick pre-wedding prank? Isabella spoke up then, her tone as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. We have read your messages, Chloe. All of them. Every deceitful word you wrote about Noah, about me, about his family. About your intentions for this marriage. Her gaze was unyielding. There's no point denying any of it. We have the proof. I didn't. Those weren't. Don't. Chloe stammered, color draining from her face. Noah cut her off, his voice rising for the first time, laced with raw hurt and burgeoning fury. You called my mother, the woman who welcomed you into her home, a rich old woman who only knows how to write checks? He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. You bragged to your friend on Glam Life that you'd have everything under control, meaning my finances and future. Within 6 months of the wedding, his voice hardened further. You called me too easy to manipulate? Said all you had to do was pretend to be fragile and sweet and you get anything you want? Do you want me to quote more, Chloe? Because Isabella has pages of it. Chloe froze, cornered, her eyes darting wildly between Noah and Isabella. I glanced at Mom. She stood stock still, her face pale and slack with shock, as if she was finally truly seeing the daughter she had blindly adored and enabled for the first time. The carefully constructed image of her perfect Chloe was shattering before her eyes. Those were just stupid jokes. Chloe finally burst out, her voice shrill, desperate. Private messages between friends. You know how girls talk. We exaggerate. It wasn't serious. Isabella gave a short, bitter, utterly dismissive laugh. And what about the consultation you scheduled last month with that high-profile divorce attorney? The one specializing in complex asset division? Was that just a joke too, Chloe? That revelation hung in the air, damning and irrefutable. Just then, the study door opened again, and Dad, Arthur, entered the room, his expression heavy, grim. I didn't know who had summoned him, perhaps Isabella with a discreet text. But his unexpected presence seemed to make the already tense atmosphere sink even deeper into strained silence. He looked from Noah's rigid back to Chloe's panicked face, then to Mom's stricken expression. Is this true? He asked, his voice raspy, looking directly at Chloe, demanding an answer. Chloe didn't respond, just stared at him defiantly, tears starting to well in her eyes. Dad turned his gaze to Mom. Eleanor? Did you know anything about this? About any of it? Mom shook her head weakly, tears now streaming down her own face. I had no idea, Arthur. I didn't think Chloe, she couldn't do something like this. There must be a mistake. Her voice trailed off, unconvincing even to her own ears. You never think, Eleanor, Dad said slowly, sadly, a lifetime of weary resignation in his voice. You've never wanted to look at what's really going on, have you? Especially when it comes to Chloe. Then, he did something unexpected. He turned towards me. And for the first time in what felt like countless years, he didn't avoid my eyes. He met my gaze directly, his own filled with a profound, unfamiliar sadness and regret. Olivia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. Both Mom and I stared at him, stunned into silence. I couldn't remember the last time Dad had apologized for anything, let alone apologized directly, unequivocally, to me. I've been silent for far too long, he continued, his voice gaining a semblance of strength. I let things drift. Let everything veer off course because it was easier than confronting the truth. He took a deep breath. And I know now. I know you were right all along, Olivia. About Chloe. About the unfairness. About everything. I didn't know how to react. I felt a strange mix of vindication and numbness. Part of me, the part that had yearned for this acknowledgement for decades, felt a sharp pang. But another, larger part, the part that had grown calloused from years of being overlooked and dismissed, felt detached. His apology, while perhaps sincere now, felt impossibly late. Decades too late. Chloe, however, snapped out of her shock, her fear instantly transmuting into predictable rage. You're taking her side, she shrieked, pointing an accusing, trembling finger at me, her voice rising hysterically. Against your own daughter? Your favorite daughter. The one you've always loved. I'm being turned on by my entire family, betrayed on my wedding day. Over a few stupid, meaningless texts. Noah gripped the edge of the heavy table, his knuckles white. Don't you dare call them stupid texts, Chloe, he ground out, his voice dangerously low. They weren't meaningless. That's who you really are. It's your true character laid bare. You don't understand. Chloe shouted back, tears streaming down her face now, mascara starting to run. Her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and desperation. I do love you, Noah. I do. I panicked. I didn't want to lose the chance to finally build a stable, secure life. What's so wrong with wanting that? Isabella raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression glacial. Is that truly what love looks like, Chloe? Scheming? Manipulation? Planning your divorce and financial settlement before the wedding ceremony even starts? She's lying. She made it all up. Chloe spun towards me again, her eyes blazing with hatred, seeking a scapegoat. This is all your fault, Olivia. It always is. Her voice rose to a near scream. If you weren't so bitter and jealous all the time. If you hadn't spent years poisoning Mom and Dad against me with your quiet little martyr act. None of this would be happening. Today wouldn't be ruined. I took a deep, steadying breath, refusing to be drawn into her histrionics, keeping my voice calm, measured. Chloe, I stated simply, letting the truth hang in the air. You did this to yourself. Your choices, your actions, your words. Don't try to blame anyone else for the consequences. You've always been the outsider in this family. Chloe screamed, spitting the words like venom. The weird, quiet one. Always pretending to be so good, so virtuous, just to make Mom feel guilty and get attention. What do you really want, Olivia? Huh? To steal everything I have? To ruin my life like you think Mom and Dad ruined yours? No, Chloe, I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly in the tense room. I don't want anything from you. I never did. I paused, meeting her wild gaze directly. I just want the truth to finally be seen. By everyone. Mom stepped forward then, hesitantly. She looked at Chloe, truly looked at her, at the mascara-streaked face contorted in rage, the desperate accusations. The undeniable evidence laid bare. She looked at her for a long, searching moment, her own expression shifting from confusion, to hurt, to dawning horror, and finally, to a heartbreaking, shattered understanding. "Chloe," Mom said softly, her voice barely a whisper, thick with tears and disillusionment. "Oh, Chloe. I can't defend you anymore. Not this time." Chloe stood frozen, utterly still. Her lips moved, forming silent words, as if she wanted to argue, to plead, to somehow fix this unfixable situation. But no words came. No excuses, no manipulations, no crocodile tears could mend the wreckage she had created. She turned her gaze towards me one last time, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine fear in Chloe's eyes. Not the fleeting fear of being caught in a lie, but a deeper, more profound fear. The fear of realizing that the safety net of familial indulgence and unconditional support had finally, irrevocably, been withdrawn. The fear of being utterly, completely alone, with no one left standing by her side. Chloe stood there in the dead, oppressive quiet of the study, breathing heavily, raggedly, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. Knuckles white. The meticulously applied bridal makeup from just a few hours ago was now disastrously smudged around her eyes. Trails of black mascara etching paths through her foundation. The pristine white wedding gown, a symbol of purity and hope that had elicited gasps of admiration from guests earlier, now seemed constricting. Burdensome, stripped bare of the fairy tale elegance she had so desperately craved for her grand day. It looked like a costume for a role she could no longer play. She whipped her head towards me, her eyes narrowing into slits, darkening with a potent mixture of rage and desperation. "You," she hissed, her voice cracking, venomous. "You always wanted this, didn't you? To take me down. To see me fail." She took a step towards me, her expression contorted. "You never let me have one single moment of happiness, one peaceful day, did you?" I didn't answer. What was there left to say? The truth was laid bare, ugly and undeniable. But Chloe didn't need, or want, a reply. Fueled by a potent cocktail of humiliation and fury, she suddenly charged towards me, eyes blazing with incoherent rage. Her expensive satin heels echoing sharply against the polished hardwood floor of the study. Instinctively, I braced myself, but I didn't move back. I wasn't afraid of her physical threats, only weary of the endless emotional warfare. And then, in that split second before Chloe could reach me, a steady, resolute arm slid firmly between us. It was Isabella. "That is quite enough, Chloe," Isabella said. Her voice wasn't raised, not even slightly, but it carried an unmistakable sharpness, like tempered steel, cutting through Chloe's hysteria. Chloe froze mid-stride, stunned by the unexpected physical intervention, her momentum halted. "Get out of my way," she spat, trying to push past Isabella's arm. "You have caused more than enough chaos and pain for one day," Isabella replied firmly, holding her ground effortlessly. Her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Chloe's unraveling state. "If I were to allow you to commit one more foolish, potentially actionable act, that failure would be on me. And I do not fail." Chloe panted, her chest heaving, her wild eyes darting frantically around the room, searching desperately for an escape route, or perhaps for one last ally, someone, anyone, still on her side. But no one spoke. No one stepped forward to defend her. Noah leaned heavily against the mahogany table, his expression shuttered, unreadable, his gaze distant. My father, Dad, had his head bowed, his brow deeply furrowed, his shoulders slumped as if he'd finally, truly accepted a bitter, long-avoided truth about his favored daughter, and perhaps his own complicity. And my mother, Mom, the woman who had once excused, rationalized, and fiercely defended every single mistake Chloe ever made, stood frozen near the doorway, clutching her designer purse strap like a drowning woman clutching driftwood, her eyes rimmed with red. Utterly silent, utterly defeated. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken recriminations and shattered illusions. Then, with a choked sob of pure frustration and rage, Chloe violently pushed past Isabella's restraining arm. Her heels clattered loudly against the floor as she stormed out of the study, not bothering to close the door behind her. Her long, elaborate wedding train, designed for a graceful glide down the aisle, now swept awkwardly, almost frantically, behind her through the quiet upstairs hallway. For a moment, I thought she would disappear down the corridor, perhaps retreat to the bridal suite to dissolve into hysterics privately. But no, that wasn't Chloe's style. She needed an audience. She shoved open the grand double doors leading back down the main staircase to the opulent reception hall, the grand ballroom, where the party, albeit subdued now, was still technically in progress. Where soft music still drifted from hidden speakers, where hundreds of unsuspecting guests were still mingling, laughing softly, clinking glasses, and posing for awkward photos against the backdrop of ridiculously extravagant white floral arrangements. And when Chloe burst into their midst, breath ragged, designer hair disheveled, eyes wild and mascara streaked, everything stopped. Instantly, the murmur of conversation died. The music seemed to falter, then faded into abrupt silence. Heads turned, slowly at first, then rapidly. A collective murmur rippled through the assembled crowd, curious whispers, stunned gasps, then shocked, disbelieving stares. The rest of us from the tense confrontation in the study, Noah, Isabella, Mom, Dad, and I, followed quietly down the stairs behind her. Emerging onto the landing overlooking the ballroom. No one tried to stop her now. Perhaps no one wanted to. Let the spectacle play out. Let the truth be witnessed. Chloe stood trembling at the center of the vast reception hall, directly under the largest, most ostentatious crystal chandelier. This space, this moment, which was supposed to represent the absolute pinnacle of her life, her carefully curated fairy tale, was now rapidly devolving into the stage for the humiliating public downfall of a self-crowned queen. Built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. You think you can do this to me? Chloe screamed, her voice raw, echoing unnervingly through the suddenly cavernous, silent ballroom. Bouncing off the high ceilings and polished walls, she gestured wildly around the room. Humiliate me like this? In front of everyone? Her voice cracked with tears and fury. I gave everything for this day. Months and months of planning. Agonizing over every single stupid detail, from the invitations to the napkins. She glared towards the head table, where her uneaten meal sat cold. And now, over a few ridiculous messages, a few meaningless, private words between friends, you're going to destroy everything? Destroy me? No one answered. The guests stood frozen, awkward, uncertain how to react. Noah stepped forward slowly, deliberately, walking down the final steps onto the ballroom floor, his gaze steady, unwavering, and utterly devoid of its earlier warmth. He stopped a few feet from Chloe. No one destroyed you, Chloe, he stated calmly, his voice carrying clearly in the unnatural silence. You did that all by yourself. She shook her head wildly, tears spilling freely now, carving clean paths through her smudged makeup. You love me, Noah, she insisted desperately, clinging to the illusion. You know you do. I did all of this for us. For our future. Isabella descended the stairs then, moving with slow, deliberate grace, radiating quiet authority. She came to stand beside her son, facing Chloe, her voice chillingly calm, yet cutting deep. I once held out hope, Chloe, Isabella said, her tone even, that you might genuinely become a part of this family. That you might love my son for who he is. She paused, her eyes sweeping briefly over Chloe's disheveled appearance. But it's clear now that you never wanted to be a Sinclair. You only ever wanted what the Sinclairs have. A quiet, collective oh. Rippled through the crowd like a tangible wave. Comprehension dawned on faces. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. A few discreetly set down their champagne glasses, their expressions shifting from confusion to dawning realization, tinged with pity or perhaps disgust. Chloe glanced around frantically, her breath coming in ragged gasps, sensing the shift in the room, the loss of sympathy. She made all of this up. Chloe shrieked suddenly, whirling around and pointing a trembling, accusing finger directly at me. Standing silently on the stairs above. Olivia. She's behind all of this. She's always been jealous of me. Always trying to undermine me, to drag me down. Her voice rose again, becoming increasingly shrill, hysterical. She spent her entire miserable life lurking in the background, and now she wants to pull me down with her. Ruin my happiness because she has none. Taking a deep breath, I descended the remaining stairs, calm and steady, stopping beside Noah and Isabella. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but clear and unwavering, easily audible in the pin-drop silence. I don't need to drag anyone down, Chloe, I stated simply, meeting her wild gaze without flinching. The truth, as it turns out, carries its own weight. It doesn't need my help. Chloe finally went silent, her accusations dying on her lips. The tension in the ballroom was palpable, thick as wire, drawn taut. All eyes were on her now, the guests, the staff, her parents, her sister, the man she was supposed to marry. Even those who had once eagerly cheered her on, admired her beauty, her confidence, her seemingly perfect life, now just stood there in uncomfortable, judging silence. She turned back to Noah, her expression crumbling, clinging to one final, desperate shred of hope. Noah. You can't just leave me, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I'm your wife. We took vows. In front of everyone. Noah regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, perhaps pity mingling with the profound hurt. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket again and pulled out the same crisp white envelope he had presented in the study, the one containing the annulment papers. He held it up, not menacingly, but clearly, in front of Chloe, for all to see. This, Noah said slowly, his voice calm, cold, and utterly final, is the petition for annulment. He paused, letting the words sink in, echoing in the vast, silent room. And as I told you before, Chloe, I already signed it. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath. The fairy tale had officially, irrevocably, shattered. Isabella gently placed a hand on her son's shoulder, a gesture of quiet support and solidarity. Let's go, Noah, she said softly. Together, mother and son turned, without a backward glance at the weeping bride, and began to walk steadily, purposefully, towards the ballroom exit. As they disappeared through the grand doors, leaving the wreckage behind, Chloe stood utterly alone. A solitary figure adrift in a sea of glittering chandeliers, wilting floral arrangements, and stunned, silent onlookers. She had once been the undeniable center of attention, the radiant star of her own carefully constructed universe. Built on a foundation of manipulation, entitlement, and appearances. Now, in the harsh glare of exposed truth, it had all crumbled spectacularly, right here, right now. In front of everyone she had ever sought to impress. Exactly 1 week after Chloe's disastrous, aborted wedding, I woke up in my own small, quiet apartment in Bridgeport. Sunlight streamed through the familiar window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. There were no opulent floral arrangements wilting in corners, no distant echoes of strained violin music. No judgmental glances or whispered side comments following me. Just me, the comforting presence of my bookshelves lining the walls, and a profound, welcome silence. My phone buzzed gently on the nightstand beside my bed. I glanced idly at the screen. Mom. It was the 9th missed call from her in just 3 days. I sighed and silenced the ringer. Yeah, I wasn't answering. I'd heard enough, seen enough, endured enough in that cold study, in that echoing ballroom, and frankly, throughout an entire lifetime of quiet endurance and forced politeness, I didn't need, nor did I particularly want, a tearful, half-hearted apology designed more to assuage her guilt than to acknowledge my pain. I didn't need a performative hug or a sudden, convenient display of maternal concern. I certainly didn't need them to desperately try and stitch back together the facade of a picture-perfect family just to save face in front of their Maplewood neighbors. That ship hadn't just sailed, it had sunk spectacularly. Later that afternoon, as I was making myself a cup of coffee in my small kitchen, savoring the simple ritual, a text message notification pinged on my phone. It was from Mom again. Olivia, I know you must be angry. Terribly angry. And you have every right to be. I can't change the past, I realize that now. But I desperately want to see you. Please? Can we have dinner? Just the two of us. We need to talk. I stared at the message on the small screen for a long time, the coffee forgotten in my hand. The old Olivia, the younger, more hopeful, more desperate for approval Olivia from just a few years ago, would have jumped at the chance. She would have immediately texted back a yes, of course. She would have agonized over what to wear, picked out something nice but unassuming, arrived precisely on time, plastered on a polite smile, and racked her brain for safe, light conversation topics to keep the inevitable awkwardness and tension at bay. She would have clung to the faintest, most foolish hope of finally hearing Mom say, "I'm proud of you, Olivia." Or even just hearing her say my name with genuine warmth, genuine affection, just once. But that Olivia, that hopeful, accommodating girl, didn't exist anymore. She had finally died somewhere between the service corridor bench and the grand ballroom floor at Willow Creek Manor. I put the phone down on the counter, screen dark. No reply. No anger, no recriminations, just a quiet severing. It was no longer necessary. That evening, feeling restless, I went for a long walk along the familiar path beside the Silverstream River, which wound its way through the heart of Bridgeport. Small, decorative lights hung from the railings along the promenade, their reflections shimmering like scattered jewels across the dark, still water. The crisp early autumn air carried the clean scent of fallen leaves and the distant, soft sounds of city life, traffic, laughter from unseen strangers enjoying the evening. I found a quiet stone bench overlooking the water and sat down, pulling an old, creased photograph from the depths of my wallet. It was a family picture taken one Christmas, years ago, when I was maybe 16. Chloe, predictably, was positioned front and center, beaming ear to ear, wearing a ridiculously bright red velvet dress Mom had probably chosen. Mom sat beside her, one hand resting proudly, possessively, on Chloe's shoulder, smiling brightly for the camera. Dad stood slightly behind them, a vague, non-committal expression on his face. And me? I stood off to the side, partially obscured by the drooping branches of the over-decorated Christmas tree, wearing an awkward, ill-fitting sweater, looking like an afterthought accidentally included in the frame. I stared at the faded photograph for a long time, studying the forced smiles, the ingrained family dynamics captured in that single, static moment. Then, gently, deliberately, I folded the photo in half and tucked it back into the recesses of my wallet, out of sight. I no longer needed to stare at the evidence of my peripheral existence. I no longer needed to try and force myself into a family picture where I was never meant to truly fit. Another call vibrated my phone in my pocket. Hesitantly, I pulled it out. This time, the caller ID read, "Dad." Against my better judgment, perhaps out of lingering habit or a flicker of curiosity, I answered, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. "Olivia," Dad said, his voice sounding rougher, slower, older than usual. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, I know I'm not good with words, Olivia. You know that better than anyone." I didn't answer, I just listened, waiting. "But, that day, at the wedding, when you spoke up, and when your mother finally saw who Chloe really was." He paused, taking a shaky breath. I think maybe, just maybe, for the first time in her life, Eleanor actually understood. Understood how alone you've felt. How unfair it's all been. Another long pause followed, filled only by the gentle lapping of the river against the bank. "Whether you can ever forgive us or not, Olivia, and I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't. I need you to know that I know I was wrong." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I was wrong to stay silent. Wrong to let it go on for so long. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, not really. But I needed to say it. "I want you to know." I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the cool stone of the bench. No tears came. No surge of anger or residual pain. Just a quiet, profound sense of peace settling over me, like a soft blanket. The validation, however late, was noted, but it no longer held the power it once would have. "Thank you, Dad," I said softly, my voice even. "I appreciate the call. Truly." I took a breath. "But I don't need an apology anymore. Not from you, not from Mom." I paused, letting the words sink in, "for both our sakes. What I need now is freedom. Just the freedom to live my own life, quietly, on my own terms." That night, I went home and, with a sense of calm resolve, pulled the bulky, dust-covered family photo albums down from the top shelf of my closet. I didn't flip through them with bitterness or nostalgia. I didn't feel the urge to burn them or tear them up in some dramatic gesture. I simply placed them, one by one, into a sturdy cardboard box, taped it shut securely, and slid it onto the highest shelf in the back of the wardrobe. Out of sight, out of mind. An era had definitively ended, and I felt no compulsion to look back. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening rearranging my bookshelves, making space for the new acquisitions in my field. The specialist library science journals and archival texts that represented my passion, my career, my independently chosen future. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't book a cathartic trip to the Bahamas or some other exotic locale I'd once dreamed my family might take together. The need for grand gestures felt unnecessary now. Instead, I simply made myself a good cup of coffee, sat by my window overlooking the awakening city of Bridgeport, and breathed deeply. This time, I chose me. My quiet life, my books, my peaceful solitude. I didn't need their forgiveness to move forward. I didn't need their validation to feel whole. And most importantly, critically, I finally understood, deep in my bones, that I didn't need their conditional, inequitable love to feel worthy. Because my worth, I now knew with unshakable certainty, doesn't come from how others see me. Especially not from the distorted gaze of a family trapped in its own dysfunctional patterns. It comes from how I see myself. Family might be where we come from, the biological ties that bind us initially. But it's not always where we truly belong, where our authentic selves can flourish. Real family, the family we choose or create, is built on mutual respect, on truly listening, on celebrating successes without envy, on offering support without judgment, on making space for everyone to be seen and valued equally. It shouldn't require a constant, exhausting fight just to be acknowledged, just to be seen. And sometimes, the bravest, most self-loving thing you can possibly do is to recognize when a relationship, even one bound by blood, is irrevocably broken, and to summon the courage to walk away. Not in anger or bitterness, necessarily, but with quiet dignity. Not to run away from the past, but to finally, truly, step towards yourself and your own future.